Looking for a new playmat or some custom sleeves? You can support Magic Untapped in the process by clicking on the affiliate link for Inked Gaming in the description. The 46th expansion in Magic the Gathering history, the 180-card Eventide, released on July 25, 2008. With the set's release came the conclusion of the 4-part story that began the previous autumn with Lorwyn and carried on through Morningtide and Shadowmoor. You can experience the story of Eventide yourself by reading the novel by the same name, written by Corey J. Herndon and Scott McGough. And of course, there's always our summary of it all.
As if you'd read the cliff notes themselves.
A year has passed since the events of the Great Aurora, the plane-altering event that turned the idyllic land of Lorwyn into the nightmarish hell that is Shadowmoor. Aisling, a flamekin from the old world, now a cinder known as the Extinguisher, has grown immensely in power and is quite insane. She is the bane of not just her own kind, who both worship and fear her, but of pretty much everyone residing in Shadowmoor. In short, the maniacal Aisling is constantly trying to burn the world to the ground as penance for what she has become, and seemingly everyone else on the plane, at one point or another, tries to stop her. It's Aisling versus the world, or rather, the world versus Aisling. As the Cinder becomes more and more of an active threat, she laid waste to most of the Kithkin town of Kinsier, then went to do the same to the town of Mist Meadow. The town's hero, Jack Cheerdaw, attempts to stop her. Thankfully, he has Brigid Biley backing him up, along with a number of Weltleave elves from the nearby forest. Brigid, still in possession of the Crescent of Morningtide that she, kind of, pilfered from the merfolk Sige, allows her to bend water to her will, but even water-bending power is not enough to extinguish the Extinguisher. Aisling confronts Brigid and, despite the change the world and most of its inhabitants underwent a year prior, still remembers her. Quite well, in fact. Indeed, Aisling showed her former friend mercy. She was allowed to live, if nothing else, to witness the Extinguisher burn everything around her to the ground. And she would have succeeded, were it not for Idrin of the Wilt Leaf. The elf set himself up as a conduit to channel the very essence of the Wilt Leaf forest through his body and against the rampaging Cinder, hurling her far away from what remained of the town, but consuming his own life in the process. Meanwhile, Una, Queen of the Fae, and the behind-the-scenes orchestrator of not just the Great Aurora, but of many affairs on the plane, made contact with Tarcha, a Kithkin survivor from Kinsier, who, with the help of the Kithkin collective consciousness, the Mind Weft, was able to ultimately repel Aisling before all was lost. The Fae Queen offered to help her devastated town in exchange for it and its citizens supporting her against the Extinguisher. Desperate, Tarcha agreed. Back with Brigid, the Kithkin meets up with Marlin. She pleads with the elven avatar about the importance of the merfolk's patron, the source of water brine, in their efforts against Aisling, stating that, in order to defeat a powerful being of fire, they need the assistance of a powerful being of water. The duo enlist their former ally, Sige, once a fairy captain, but now a vicious pirate, by promising to return to him the Crescent of Morningtide. With his once cherished possession as an eventual payment, the pirate captain agrees to assist. They journey to and meet with the source, and, in short, Sige essentially forces the Great Water Spirit to support their cause. Apparently, even in this new dark world, it pays to be the heir of Morningtide. The trio, along with Sige's scurvy crew, then cook up a plan to ambush Aisling and quell her violent streak. Just outside of Kinsier, the group, which, by then, included not just Brigid, Marlin, and Sige and his pirates, but also the elf, Rise, and Colfernus Sapling, got their chance. Unfortunately, Aisling proved to be a more formidable foe than they had estimated. Were it not for an intervention by none other than Una herself, the Extinguisher was sure to have won. Unfortunately, the Queen of the Fae had not swooped in to rescue the group. Rather, she wanted Aisling's power all for herself. Unbeknownst to Una, however, is that Marlin, the elven maiden she had made her avatar and, essentially, backup copy, possesses the scroll that once belonged to the prophetic giant seer, Roisin Meanderer. With the power of the scroll and the Crescent of Morningtide, which the elf never actually intended to hand over to the pirate, an action that would find Sidge and his crew departing the scene, Marlin went after the Fae Queen with the intent of destroying her. Using the power of the Crescent, she focused the elemental power of the Source and Aisling's fire at the Fae Matriarch. It's here that the beans get spilled as Una's plans are finally made public. Una, it seems, has been actively manipulating the natural order of Lorwyn Shadowmoor by stretching its days into centuries. And Kolfanor, the late, ancient treefolk seer, wanted the game to come to an end. Apparently, a disaster in a far-away world caused the Great Aurora to come much, much sooner than Una had planned. And this frightened the Fae Queen, hence why she took the corpse of the Moorsong elf, Marlin, and reanimated it as a simulacrum of herself, essentially making her own version of Kolfanor's plans of preservation for once the Great Aurora comes, just in case. And that included having Marlin find Rise when she did, infiltrating the group as she had. Unfortunately, things went awry as Marlin began to experience independence from Una, which really complicated things for the Fae Queen. Unfortunately for the group, Una was able to flee from the scene. The Fae Queen escaped to the Kithkin capital of Cair Ulios, where she quickly usurped power from the king and queen, then subdued the city's population, using the power of the Mind Weft made known to her by Tarcha to further fuel her own power. The elf, Griffith, however, dissented, and sacrificed himself to, at the very least, sever the ties she had to the area's elven population. Marlin pursued. As she gained ground, Una taunted her by sending apparitions of herself to slow her down. Eventually, she was at the capital steps. Una dispatched an army of fairies to stop her. Marlin, though, had her own army, and the two sides battled just outside of the city's gates. The skirmish was all the distraction needed for Rise, Kolfanor's sapling, the Vendilion fairy, Indri, and a righted Aisling to infiltrate Glen Elendra, Una's home and, thanks to the Fae Queen's magic, the only place in Shadowmoor unaffected by the Great Aurora. They are intent on uprooting and ending Una from there. The group's incursion, however, did not go unnoticed. Una sends a razor-sharp thorn vine towards Kolfanor's sapling, slicing the young yew in twain. The fairy, Indri, survived, but lost his wings in the process. Rise, wise in yew magic, absorbs the sapling's poisonous essence. Shortly thereafter, fresh from battling Una's phantasms outside of Cair Ulios, Marlin arrives in Una's realm. The elven avatar reunites with what remains of her group, though, in the chaos, loses control of Aisling's burning hot elemental essence, which flows back into the Flamekin, once again turning her cinder. A twin attack of poison and fire come from Rise and Aisling, aimed directly at Una. The distraction provided by her comrades was all Marlin needed, as she took some moonglove, the very same moonglove she was sent to gather before she and the rest of the wedding party she was part of was slain in the story's beginning, and used it to slay the Fae Queen. As Una lay dying, the now wingless Indri coldly watches the demise of his mother, ignoring her commands to save her. Instead, he lures a magpie to fly him to Cair Ulios, wanting to know the fate of his sisters. There, the Vendilion fairy finds them among the deceased, obviously slain by one another during the earlier fray between Marlin and Una. He takes their corpses away from the gore and carnage that surrounds the area, and lays them down peacefully in the nearby woods. He then lays down beside his sisters' bodies and drifts asleep. dreaming about them, he decides not to wake up so that he may forever be by their sides once more. Meanwhile, the killing of Una restores a natural day-night schedule to Lorwyn Shadowmoor for the first time in centuries. As night turns back into day on the plain, Marlin assumes Una's role as Queen of the Fae. Una's essence, however, remains intact, even though her body had failed her. A new trio of fairies are created to replace the Vendilion clique, and, with their help, she may one day become whole again. Thus ends the story of not just Eventide, but Lorwyn Shadowmoor overall, and on a cliffhanger no less.
The show desperately needed a cliffhanger commercial break.
So, does that mean that Magic players can expect to return to the plane at some point in the future? Well,
it was also unpopular when we were originally there. It's the second lowest rated world. Shadowmoor did better than Lorwyn. If we went back, we would probably tie it. Like the most interesting aspect mechanically of the world is the fact that there's two states. That might be something we would mechanically tie into.
But even if Wizards of the Coast doesn't have any known plans to return to the plane at the moment, there is still a lot to talk about as far as Eventide is concerned.
So exciting! Ah!
Mechanically speaking, Eventide continues with what was introduced in its predecessor, Shadowmoor, with heavy use of Wither, Persist, use of the new Untapped symbol, a heavy use of -1/-1 counters, and hybrid multicolored cards, though this time around, the hybrids are enemy colored. That said, the set also introduced two keywords of its own. Chroma, an ability word that is associated with abilities that count mana symbols, or pips, of a certain color, such as the card Primal Crux, having power and toughness equal to the number of green mana symbols on permanents you control, and Retrace, a keyword that basically says, you may play this card from your graveyard so long as you discard a land card from your hand in addition to any other costs as you do. The red sorcery Flame Jab, for example, is one such card. In fact, there's a whole cycle of cards with Retrace. Most notable among them is the black discard spell Raven's Crime, which saw a good amount of play in its day. Other cycles of note amongst Eventide's assortment of 15 include Skulkin, 5 Scarecrow artifact creatures that each have an activated ability associated with a different color, such as, for the cost of 2 colorless, Antler Skulkin, giving a white creature persist until end of turn. Hatchlings, undercosted 6/6 creatures that come into play with -1/-1 counters on them, but allow you to remove them whenever you play a spell that matches their color, such as the case with Noxious Hatchling, which cares about black and green spells. And Hedge Mages, each of which is a 2/2, and represent a creature brand new to the plane of Lorwyn Shadowmoor. And one such creature type, the Donkey-Headed Noggle, was new to Magic the Gathering in general. Really, this card is quite reminiscent of Nicholas Bottom, the artisan and overconfident inspiring actor from William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, who gets changed by a fairy into, well, into an ass. Eventide also continued some cycles that began in Shadowmoor, all enemy colored of course. This includes a cycle of enemy colored lieges, a cycle of enemy colored demigods, and a cycle of enemy colored filter lands, among a few others that really aren't important enough to mention.
I'm not gonna go there.
In terms of individual cards of note, Eventide has a surprising number of them considering the overall competitive worthiness of the Lorwyn Shadow Mega Block in general. And that starts with Bloom Tender, a 1/1 elf for 1 and a green that has the capability of tapping for 1 of each color mana, should its conditions be appropriately met. Figure of Destiny, which saw a lot of competitive play back in the day. The card also served as the set's release promo. Gilderbairn, a card that can double the amount of counters on a permanent. The card, by the way, got a Lorwyn type mirrored pair in the straight to modern supplemental set Modern Horizons 2 by way of the card Glimmerbairn. Glen Elendra Archmage, which proved itself to be a strong control card that can also be a late game threat. Helix Pinnacle, an alternate win card. Nettle Sentinel, a common that can prove quite formidable in elf combo decks and is easily abused with the Morningtide card Heritage Druid. Sanity Grinding, which, at one time, was considered a top-tier card for mill strategies. Stigma Lasher, which, in one blow, can shut down life game strategies. Still Moon Cavalier, which is more or less a combination of the Jump Knights from Cold Snap, which are themselves inspired by the original Pump Knights, or Clerics, from Fallen Empires. And Waves of Aggression, a second combat phase spell with Retrace that really started rising in popularity after the release of Kaldheim in early 2021.
I thought that was a COVID thing.
I went there.
Oh, and the pre-release promo for Eventide is an alternate art version of the demigod card Overbeing of Myth. And honestly, there's been worse pre-release promos up to this point, so no real complaints.
I mean, it's not great.
So does Eventide hold a special place in your heart? Whether it does or not, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and please support Magic Untapped by subscribing to us here on YouTube. Also, please toss a buck in our Patreon tip jar to support more videos like this.